Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the Siege rework that Creative Assembly is currently testing in the Proving Grounds. Now it's a beta, so subject to change. Some things probably won't make it in the final version. I certainly hope some things won't make it in the final version. But all the same, let's talk about what they've done and what they could do in the future, what I think they should consider doing in the future. So what they've changed is they've removed pocket ladders, so units no longer have them inherently. You have to build them pre-battle. Now, I personally don't care for this change one way or another, because using pocket ladders, as with siege towers, is just a waste. You're sending units on a wall where they can be isolated and taken out. You will take more damage in your army with those specific units you're sending on a wall in most cases. The only circumstance it's kind of useful to send units on a wall is if you've already broken through a gate and your guys are already fighting beyond that gate and you just want a way to bypass the enemy blob, because blobbing up in sieges is annoying. But that is a very, very limited circumstance, and generally speaking it's not worth it because your units do get tired, they lose vigor. That can be very costly. So unless you have units with perfect vigor, which do obviously exist, or armies that have vigor reduction inherently because of various skills or research or whatever, it's usually not going to be worth it, either using siege towers or ladders. So just switching it from something that every unit has to a buildable doesn't really make any significant difference as far as I see it. But it is something a lot of people have asked up for. I just think it doesn't matter. There's a lot of issues, other issues with sieges, auto-resolve, campaign, incentives, etc. Now, beyond that, they've changed the AI behavior. Now, this is really significant, because what would happen before is the AI would kind of just split its forces all over the place, and if you breach the section of the wall, they could occasionally try and stop you with all of its force. But most of the time, the vast majority of sieges I've played before this beta, they would rarely do so. They could do it in certain specific circumstances. But now, from all the sieges I've played, the AI will try and stop me. I've still seen behavior of the AI where it's just like sitting around with its forces all over this element. One particular siege I played with Grimgore had ogres just like all over the place. And that is annoying because you're just going to have to chase them down, kill them. They're not really a challenge because their force is divided. Force concentration is a big thing in Total War. It's one of the reasons why sending units on the walls, or the primary reason why sending units on the walls via ladder or siege tower, is a waste of that unit, because you're limiting your force concentration. So it is a better change. Like, I felt the AI was reacting better to when I was attacking. Now, I do think maybe they should have one unit on the victory point, the crucial one. Or the one before that, the one you're required to capture before the final one, just so you prevent sneakers. But outside of that, I do think the AI should try and concentrate to deal with you. How it should handle multiple prongs of an attack is a discussion, though generally speaking, my perspective on this, the AI should react to the most common behaviors. And that's kind of the thing that I would stress out. The way CA should build a game is around what is the most common behavior. Because it makes sense to concentrate your force, regardless of what army or what faction you're playing as opposed to spreading your force around, I think that's something you would want to deal with. Most of the time in sieges, you can win them better if you concentrate your force on a gate, take out the towers on that particular wall, on the walls nearby if you have artillery, and then attack for that. You don't want to spread your things around because you might not have enough ammo for artillery. And even if you do have enough ammo for artillery, it's just better to keep your artillery on one side, blow everything up there, and then you can use your artillery to deal with units behind the walls, dependent on the artillery you're talking about. Sure, there's different strategies. You know, if you're playing Slaanesh, things are very different in that perspective. But Slaanesh is kind of a unique case, right? There's various cheeses, various strategies, but I do think that this is a good change. Pathfinding-wise, the new maps also related to that. I'll admit the new map, so the Greenscan map, the Skaven map, the Empire map, like, they were smaller, but my perspective on it, it kind of felt like a bit of a cheap effort. So they shrunk the settlement sizes, but you just kind of end up with these open spaces that were obviously meant to be taken over by a settlement, and now they're just open. It's great that we have more space in these settlements to deal with, to deploy, to not instantly get hit by towers. Another thing they've done with that, they've reduced the range of towers. This is a really good change. Some people will argue, well, wall towers are no longer going to be useful. That's not quite true. Wall towers will still be useful. It just means that you won't have to do the micro dance, you know, sending your lords, heroes in front, so the towers target them, then bringing your artillery behind them, so the artillery takes them out. That was annoying. And now you just have more room for deployment. I think that's a good change. I think it makes sense. It's fitting. I never really liked wall towers. You know, there's discussions on the walls, on wall towers, on putting artillery on the walls. My perspective on that. So the changes they introduced there, you know, in terms of AI behavior, wall towers, I'm fine with that. I'm not so fine. I don't really care about the wall ladders. I do care about Siege Attacker, but we'll leave that for a bit later. What I do think, however, that Creative Assembly should really improve on is pathfinding. Seemed a bit better with regards to like the issue like, oh, you're sending a unit to go for a gate, but if you put a ladder next to it, it's gonna go up the ladder. That does need improvement. It seemed a bit improved, but still an issue. But beyond that, I think the big problem with sieges is the walls. Like, they suck, regardless of how you view it. They don't suck because they're so easy to take down. You know, even breaking them doesn't necessarily feel that much of an advantage because of how breaking them, like you leave this pile of rubble behind, it's a choke point, it's limited, you have pillars that keep standing, so they suck in every respect. Like, they suck for an attacker to deal with, they also suck for a defender. They're too small, they're too thin. So you can't concentrate. So even if you could mount artillery on the walls, they wouldn't be as big of a benefit as people think they would be, because you would have too small of a space to deploy artillery. Even if we literally could deploy artillery on the entire length of the walls, they would get a range advantage, but an attacker still would have an advantage because an attacker could concentrate force better. So I think the walls need to be wider from that point of view. Like, much wider, like double the thickness of it, if they were going to be useful. Also, how units are facing should be improving. Like, if you're putting 4 units or 2 units, like currently you can put, say, 2 units back to back on a section of a wall, right? Both those units, if they're range units, should shoot outwards or inwards, depend on what they're shooting at. Right now, it's only like one part of it. There's some ways around it, but not ideal, right? So there's some ways to cheese that, but yeah, walls should work better, should be wider, the behavior of units, spells, magic. You know, there's so many things that don't work on walls, don't work in settlements. Even the camera, like, you move a camera for a gate, it's just gonna kind of bug out. So from that perspective of the actual battles themselves, better behavior. We could also talk about the buildables. I really dislike the buildables. I dislike them because it's just kind of making a tower defense thing, and it's further pushing the idea of like a blobfest fight. Like, one of the reasons you want to concentrate all your force on one section of the walls as opposed to spreading out is because of the buildables. You don't want to be shot by 10 different buildable towers or slowed down by barricades. So it's just flat out better. I think that's fine to have buildables, but not the way they're handling it right now. Also, they look like trash. Like, all the barricades look the same, all the towers look the same. There's line of sight issues, there are pattern issues. Like, there's so many problems with that. Like, that entire system just flat out sucks. I'm not against towers inside the settlement, but you look at something like Free Kingdoms. I'm gonna tell you, I played a bit of Free Kingdoms recently. The siege battles in that game, including the minor battles, are just much better. You have choke points that don't feel tedious to deal with. Now, the way the tower defense minigame feels like it's just a really bad system. Like many other ideas that were developed originally for Realms of Chaos were really bad ideas. I really do hope just on a side note, I really hope that whatever Total War game the Creative Assembly developers are working on, that the people, the geniuses in the company who came up with all the brilliant ideas that Flow failed in Realms of Chaos are no longer working in the company. Like, I don't have a thing against anyone specific, but there are a lot of bad decisions. Bad balancing decisions, bad ideas, bad everything, right? But that's with regards to battles. So there are some improvements. But here's the problem. They remove Siege Attacker from a lot of things. Now, inside the battles themselves, the problem is we already had a situation where a siege could end up like this. Welcome to the Blob Fiesta. Just have a bunch of melee guys, throw them all in at a point, win. It's genuinely the best way of winning with a melee army. Forget about strategic movement, deployment of anything like that. Just mash everything together at a particular point. Just 20 units versus 20 units, or 20 units versus 40 units. You will win. Now, in this particular case with Grimgore, I could have just waited longer for my range units to do more damage. I thought I could win here more easily. Kolek was tired, etc. It didn't end up like that. But this is an excruciatingly boring, tedious, awful gameplay experience. And I was really reminded of Pharaoh in this, and not in a good way. So I've played hundreds of hours in Pharaoh initially, then Dynasties. I'm gonna tell you, for all the good things those games, that game did, both versions of it, in terms of campaign mechanics, etc., it was also really, really bad in terms of settlement battles and siege battles. Because Creative Assembly needs to understand, we want to win these sieges. We know we can win these sieges. But the actual experience of winning settlement battles and siege battles is fucking awful. And this is kind of related to Point on Ladders, though, to be fair, it was pretty awful, like, even when we had pocket ladders. But it's awful from the perspective of, like, in a lot of campaigns, with a lot of races, with a lot of characters, you end up in a situation where the best way from the perspective of minimizing casualties so you're as strong as possible on the campaign map, just blob everything up, attack a section. If you're ranged, it just results in a situation where you're just standing there shooting for 10-20 minutes. It's faster now that the enemy forces our concentrate on a particular point of a gate, but it's still not a great experience. If you're a melee faction, it ends up like this. And since EA Sofia is working on it, I'm gonna say the people designing battles in there had no clue what they were doing. Just flat out, they screw up. Like, this is the thing that sucked in Troy, sucked in Pharaoh, and now if they're going to go down this path, it already was bad enough in Warhammer 3, but based on the direction they seem to be going, it's gonna suck even more in Warhammer 3. And it's kind of gonna be pointless as well, to a degree. It's just gonna make things tedious. It's not gonna make for a better experience. It's not gonna increase the longevity of campaigns. And eventually, in a campaign, it's not even gonna matter. That's where we get into the discussion on Siege Attacker. Creative Assembly removed Siege Attacker from a great deal of Legendary Lords in the game, including Scarbrand, which is ridiculous, but is a known oversight. I do personally find it ridiculous to remove it from someone like Grimgore or Archeon or many others who really are just such machines of death and destruction that they should be able to destroy things, or even mages. Really, most of the Legendary Lords in Warhammer 3 are such powerful characters with magical weapons that if you think a wall is gonna stop them, or a gate, that is not true to their characters in the lore. But from a gameplay standpoint, it does create more issues than it solves. Now, the intent here, which I'm sure Creative Assembly has, or certainly the people that are listening on Reddit and Discords have, is like, well, the game is too fast, let's slow it down, let's force the player to spend multiple turns besieging a settlement. That is not a great sentiment. One, because it's just creating the idea of a slower campaign, really an enter and button simulator, just spend more turns just for the sake of spending more turns. If the end game was fun, would be different, but it's just adding on top of the inverted difficulty curve that we already have in Warhammer 3, which is that the early portion of the campaign is the hardest and the late game is very easy. And that's not solving the problem at all, it's just making that situation worse, and there's ways around it. And that's kind of the problem. If players can attack settlements instantly, then they'll be incentivized to do so, one way or another. And there will always be ways. Artillery, big monsters. Unless CA really wants to spend a lot of effort and a lot of time and energy redesigning the entirety of Siege Attacker on every unit or hero, which is probably a lot of work. And even then, you'd still have units that, you know, can destroy walls, artillery, if nothing else, monstrous units. Whether or not Bloodthirsters should have the Wallbreaker attribute, which I think they should, along many other things, that's a different discussion. But even under the assumption that you wouldn't have Siege Attacker units, even if that didn't exist whatsoever, it still would fix nothing. Because you can build siege equipment in a single turn. It's a wasted turn, but let me tell you what's going to happen in most situations, because it already does happen in the game. And it happened in Troy, it happened in Pharaoh. It feels like they've learned none of those lessons that they should have learned in those games. See, if you have a situation where you can't attack a settlement the moment you arrive at it, okay, you lay siege. You wait a turn to build siege equipment. And then you attack it. And even if you remove the ability of units of attacking gates inside the battle and you wait for the slow-ass ram, it changes nothing. It's just more tedium. But what realistically would happen, you can just bypass the entire damn thing. Because a lot of the times, especially on higher difficulties, they might have multiple armies around the settlement. And you can just engage a minor army outside the settlement and attack that and have a field battle and just completely wipe out the defender. So you don't even have to fight the siege. Or you could just auto-resolve that. Because armies don't have an auto-resolve benefit, settlements do. It is ridiculous to think about the idea you could be facing something like Grimgor on the field of battle, and you're going to actually just auto-resolve that. Probably won't in a lot of situations on Legendary, but you can auto-resolve that easier, far more often than you would at any settlement by the Greenskins with fewer casualties. And that's a bad dynamic. You're creating the situation that exists, and the situation that existed in Troy, the situation that existed in Pharaoh, the situation that has existed in Warhammer 3 for a very long time, and it seems like they're looking to make it worse, is you can auto-resolve the most interesting and fun battles and the hardest battles, the field battles. But you kind of are forced to fight the sieges, which are the worst battles to play and the easiest battles to play. That is not a great dynamic. And just taking more turns to get to the same result you could previously, and not even really taking more turns, is not a solution. But again, even if you completely remove Siege Attacker, or you removed it only in the early portion of the game, but gave people Siege Attacker later on, okay, then I just show up to a settlement, put it under siege, under a secondary lord, build siege equipment, and guess what's going to happen? The defender will either get reinforced, or if there's already a significant force, they'll just sally out of the settlement. That's exactly what will happen. And then you can probably just auto-resolve that, or fight that manually. It's certainly going to be a more interesting battle, but you're not slowing people down. You're not slowing players down. This is what sucked in Troy and Pharaoh, because like, you couldn't just attack settlements instantly. You just had to wait to turn. And then you would just auto-resolve it. And then even worse than that, what this incentivized people to do in Troy and Pharaoh in particular, is incentivize people to just get the units that are best in auto-resolve. That's one of the reasons I talked so much about getting heavily armored units, because they could do that better. There is a severe imbalance in auto-resolve compared to actual battle results. Now, they've said that they're working on that, but all the same, you're just going to build armies that are great for that, not fun armies, thematic armies, or anything like that. I think the incentive for people when they're playing a campaign fundamentally is to have a good, fun experience. Not a tedious experience, not a slow experience just for the sake of being it slow. And even then, it would only be slow potentially early on, because we are going to have units that can break down walls and attack settlements. So, congrats, you might remove Siege Attacker from a lot of the early stuff, even if you removed on old starting armies, guess what? You're just gonna get units with it anyway in a couple of turns. Plenty of races have siege attacker, if not the vast majority of races have siege attacker units at tier 2. Artillery at tier 2. Bretonia has it. Empire has it. Dwarves have it. Some races don't. Kislev doesn't. Skaven do. And even if Skaven didn't have it here, 2, they could easily get it because of how Skaven work. So this further creates the problem of that inverted difficulty curve. The hardest portion of the campaign, the most difficult, is the early game, but then you're steamrolling later on. Whereas really, what CA should be looking to do is make things more interesting as you're playing for the campaign. Give us an incentive beyond just needing certain units to have siege attacker. Just give us a genuine incentive to have those bigger campaigns, those longer campaigns, improve the end game. And with sieges, like, make them better in terms of behavior. What I would say is this. If an army attacks a settlement, then the defender of that settlement, be it the player or the AI, can just instantly sally out. Like, the moment the settlement is laid under siege, the moment it's encircled, you have on that turn that it happens, be it the end turn or when you're attacking settlement, whoever is the defender has a choice of being able to sally out. So if there's a significant enemy force in a settlement, let's say you're besieging Drakenhof and Vlad is there with 20 units, the moment you encircle it, he should just be able to sally out. Don't make me waste my end turn on that. It's not exactly the most fun and interesting experience from that perspective. It should depend on balance of power, how the AI thinks, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, auto-resolve needs to be improved, behavior of the AI, more options. And with regards to siege equipment, I think just forcing the player to wait for siege equipment to be built is a waste of time, really. Like, okay, so you're telling me that I can either fight a very tedious, boring blobfest of a battle this turn, or I can wait 2 turns and just auto-resolve it. That's exactly what happened in Pharaoh. And 200 or 300 hours in Pharaoh, I can count on one hand how many sieges I played in that game. Because I didn't need to. Because if you remove my ability to attack settlements instantly, okay, I don't care anymore. Just gonna build siege equipment and auto-resolve the crap out of everything. Build armies specifically for that. Run my entire economy in the red. Go for the tedium every turn of trading extra resources I have for bronze and food so I can keep that unit recruitment up. That's what I did in Pharaoh. And that's what they're really incentivizing with these kind of decisions. It's not a fix. It's not even a proper band-aid. It's a bad solution that has been proven to not work in multiple games. And now they want to listen to the people who are pushing this narrative to make a siege situation that's already pretty bad in terms of campaign, like how many sieges we have, campaign fatigue being an actual thing. They want to push that even further. I don't think that's the right way to go. How sieges should be from a battle perspective is important, but the incentive structure of a campaign is also important. I think if we look in real life as an examples, when you look at sieges in real life, sieges only mattered if a defender actually prepared. So they need food, they need ammo. Siege equipment, I think, should be built fast, but I think whether or not settlement can be taken easily should not be automatic. It should be something you invest resources in. Not necessarily cash because of the way the AI works, but maybe a defensive supply system or like provincial capitals consume supplies, minor settlements produce it, and you can either have it spread across your empire or centralize it on specific points. Those are just some ideas throwing around. I also think that armies that are not led by a lord, like a legendary lord, should have a significant auto-resolve benefit because they're going to be powerful, or a lord in general should have a significant auto-resolve benefit. But that's my perspective. Let me know what you guys think on this. But I think it's really important to get that incentive structure right, that difficulty curve right, the reward structure right. And I'm mentioning this because a lot of people, regardless of what you see on Reddit and Discord, a lot of people are sick and tired of it. I also think Creative Assembly should stop listening to just whatever people are posting on Discord or Reddit. And if they want to listen to a community of players that really know the game, go to the competitive multiplayer campaign community. Because those guys, you know, they want to cut through the fluff, get to the action quickly, build their empires, be strong as quickly as possible. Go get that kind of feedback, because it's going to be more valuable than whoever is posting on Reddit and